The officer's hand hit my chest before I even saw him move. I stumbled back 2 steps in my dress blues, pressed, decorated, earned, and watched his badge catch the terminal light like it was proud of itself. A sergeant's stripes. A grown man in uniform who had just shoved a decorated United States Marine in front of 300 witnesses and a dozen security cameras. He had no idea what he had just set in motion. Nobody in that airport did. But they were all about to find out. A year before that moment, I wouldn't have believed any of it was possible. My name is Marcus Darnell Webb, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, 8 years of active service, 2 deployments to Afghanistan, 1 commendation for valor under fire, and a service record so clean you could eat off it. I had spent 8 years building something, not just a career, but a version of myself that I was genuinely proud of. The kind of man who made his mother put her hand over her mouth when she saw him walk through the door in uniform. The kind of man whose younger brother called just to say, without any occasion at all, "I want to be like you when I grow up." I had worked for every inch of what I had. Nobody gave me a single thing. The morning of August 14th started the way most good mornings start, with the specific, ordinary kind of peace you don't notice until it's gone. I was flying home to Jacksonville, North Carolina after 2 weeks of leave in Detroit, where my mother had turned 60 and cried through almost the entire dinner because she said she still couldn't believe how her son had turned out. The night before my flight, I pressed my dress blues myself. I always pressed them myself, even when people offered. Something about putting on that uniform required the act of preparing it with your own hands. I hung the jacket on the back of the bedroom door and stood looking at it for a long moment before I went to bed. The ribbons caught the streetlight coming through the curtain. I remember thinking that I was tired and that I was glad and that everything was fine. I had no idea it was the last night of that particular version of my life. Detroit Metropolitan Airport on a Wednesday morning in August is its own particular kind of organized chaos. Rolling luggage, crying children, a low collective hum of 1,000 people going 1,000 places. I arrived 2 hours early, as I always did. Marines are either early or they're wrong, and that habit had been burned into me so deep it had become personality. I moved through check-in and security with no trouble. The TSA agent at my lane recognized my service ribbons and gave me the quiet, professional nod I had learned to accept without making a production of it. I thanked him and moved on. I had my boarding pass, a large coffee from the first shop past security, and gate D-17, where my flight to Jacksonville boarded at 10:40. 40 minutes to sit, drink coffee, and do absolutely nothing. For a man who spent his professional life in motion, 40 minutes of nothing was a genuine luxury, and I intended to use every second of it. I had just settled into a seat near the gate when I noticed the disruption about 30 feet down the concourse. A woman, late 30s, luggage piled around her feet, a toddler balanced on one hip, was in a raised, panicked conversation with an airport police officer. The officer was heavyset, red-faced even from a distance, and his body language was the kind that anyone with operational experience reads in under 3 seconds. Not the posture of a man managing a situation, but the posture of a man who had already decided how it was going to end and was just waiting for confirmation. He was pointing at her luggage. She was shaking her head, shifting the child, trying to explain something in what I gradually understood was a mix of English and Haitian Creole. The toddler had started to cry in that exhausted, helpless way small children cry when they sense the adults around them losing control. The officer's voice climbed another register. I watched, because something about the whole scene had already started to feel wrong in the precise way that wrong things feel before they become worse. A low, familiar pressure behind the sternum, the kind your body learns to recognize before your conscious mind names it. I should have stayed in my seat. I know that now, and I knew it in that moment, and I got up anyway, because 8 years in the Marine Corps does something specific to your sense of when intervention is necessary, and when standing aside quietly is its own kind of moral failure. I walked over without rushing, coffee still in hand, and said, to no one in particular but clearly directed at the officer, "Everything okay here?" It was not an aggressive question. It was not a challenge. It was the kind of question a calm, reasonable adult asks in a tense public situation, spoken in the even, measured tone I had been specifically trained to use when things were on the edge of going sideways. The officer turned and looked at me, and I watched his eyes do the thing I had seen eyes do before, a fast, automatic scan. The kind that happens before the conscious mind has time to supervise. He looked at the uniform for exactly 1 second. Then he looked at my face. Then something shifted in his expression, and not in the direction of professional courtesy. "What's your business here?" he said, and his voice had the particular flatness of a man who was not asking a question so much as issuing a challenge dressed up as one. "Just checking in," I said, keeping my voice steady and my posture relaxed. "Looks like there might be a communication issue. I speak a little Creole, if that would help." He stared at me for a moment that stretched 2 beats longer than it needed to. The woman with the child was watching both of us now, the toddler still crying against her shoulder, her eyes moving between me and the officer with the specific, exhausted wariness of someone who has spent their entire life doing the math on situations like this one. "Nobody asked for your help," the officer said, and took 1 deliberate step forward. "Why don't you go on back to your gate?" I held his gaze. I did not step back. I was not aggressive. I was not threatening. I was standing on a public concourse in the uniform of the United States Marine Corps, with a cup of coffee in my hand, and absolutely nothing on my conscience. And some part of me, the part that had been built in places this man had never been and could not imagine, was not going to take a step backward for no reason at all. That was when he shoved me. His right hand came up and hit me flat in the chest, hard enough to send me stumbling back 2 full steps. The coffee cup hit the floor. I heard the impact before I fully processed it. A sharp, solid thud. And then the entire terminal around us made a sound I have never forgotten. 40 or 50 people inhaling in unison, like a single organism that had just witnessed something it could not quite parse. I caught my balance against a row of empty seats and stood there for a moment, heart beating at a frequency I hadn't felt since a specific afternoon in Helmand Province in 2019, my hands completely still at my sides, because every cell in my body understood that what I did in the next 10 seconds was going to matter in ways I couldn't yet fully calculate. The uniform was still perfect. I was still standing. I did not move. The officer was breathing hard, color climbing from his collar to his hairline, and he pointed at me with a finger that was not quite steady. "I told you to move on," he said low and tight, like he was daring me to give him a reason. "Now I'm telling you again." I looked at him for a long, quiet moment. I looked at his nameplate. Officer R. Kowalski, Detroit Airport Police. Then I looked up at the security camera mounted on the ceiling above us, the small black dome that had been watching everything. And then I looked back at him with a calm I had not manufactured but simply found, the way you find your footing when the noise falls away and everything resolves into sharp, clean focus. "I'm going to need your badge number," I said, and my voice came out so level it surprised even me. "I'm going to need your supervisor's name, and I need you to understand that this conversation is not over." He told me to get out of his face. He said I could be removed from the airport. And then he said something else, something low, something I will keep off this page because putting it in writing would only flatten it, but something that dropped the temperature of every person within earshot by several degrees. In the silence that followed, I heard a sound I didn't fully register until later, the small, clean click of a phone camera shutter, then another, then 3 or 4 at once, overlapping like a quiet and distributed kind of witness forming itself around what had just happened. I didn't say another word to Officer Kowalski. I picked up my coffee cup from the floor, straightened my jacket with 2 quick motions, and walked back to my gate. My hands were completely steady. My face was completely neutral. Inside, something had gone very cold. Not the cold of fear or shock, but the cold of absolute crystalline decision. I'd been in firefights where I was calmer than most people are in a grocery checkout line, and this was one of those moments where that particular wiring proved useful. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I just needed to sit down first and give my body time to catch up to what my mind had already settled. I lowered myself back into my gate seat and called my older sister Dana, who was a paralegal in Chicago and the most functionally precise person I have ever encountered in my personal life. She answered before the second ring. "Talk to me," she said the way she always does, already knowing by the sound of my breathing that something had happened. "I need you to listen to something," I said, and I told her everything that had just occurred in the exact order it happened, without emphasis or interpretation. Dana is not a person who needs things interpreted. She asked me 3 questions in quick succession. Was I physically okay? Were there witnesses? And was there a camera? I said yes, yes, and yes. A pause. The kind of pause that from anyone else would signal hesitation, but from Dana signaled the opposite. The sound of a mind processing at a speed most people don't have access to. Don't post anything, she said finally. Don't call anyone else. Not yet. Board your flight, get home safe, and call me the second you land. I'm going to make some calls in the meantime. Understood, I said. Marcus. Her voice dropped, just slightly at the edges. Are you okay? I looked down at the jacket across my knees. Still perfect? The ribbons still straight, still in order, still meaning everything they had always meant. 2 deployments, 8 years. Every cold morning and every decision made under pressure that I could stand behind. A man with a badge had just put his hand on this uniform like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. Like 8 years of sacrifice in service of a country could be dismissed with a shove and a word and a pointing finger. I will be, I said, and I meant it with my whole chest. What neither Dana nor I knew in that moment was that 2 of those phone cameras had already uploaded their footage to Twitter while I was still walking back to my gate. By the time I boarded the flight 40 minutes later, the video had been viewed 14,000 times. By the time we reached cruising altitude somewhere over Ohio, it was past 200,000. By the time we broke through the cloud cover over North Carolina and started our descent into Jacksonville, the number had cleared 1 million and was climbing every minute, and my phone, still on airplane mode, had 263 notifications stacked up and waiting. One of them was a voicemail from a producer at CNN. One was from a reporter at the Washington Post. One was from the office of a United States senator whose name I recognized immediately. And one was from someone identifying himself as the Deputy Director of Public Affairs for the Detroit Airport Police Authority, asking me, in a voice trying very hard to sound routine, and not quite managing it, to please call him back at my earliest convenience. I didn't know any of this yet. I sat in seat 14C with my jacket folded carefully across my lap and looked out the window at the late afternoon light on the clouds below us. And I thought about what a lieutenant colonel had told me in Helmand in 2019, that the most dangerous thing any person can do is underestimate someone who has decided to be patient. I had written that down in a small notebook I still kept in my kit bag. I thought about it for most of the flight. Then I closed my eyes and slept. The clean, deep, uncomplicated sleep of someone who has made a decision and is no longer afraid of what comes next. Officer R. Kowalski was beginning his afternoon break when the department's public affairs office called his supervisor's supervisor and requested that he be brought immediately to a conference room on the 3rd floor of the administration building. He had never been summoned to that room before. He walked in not yet understanding why he was there. He would not walk out the same person. The Jacksonville terminal was quiet, the way airports get quiet at the end of a day. The afternoon rush already gone, the evening flights not yet boarding, the overhead lights humming in the corridors with that particular institutional patience. I came off the jetway and turned my phone off airplane mode, and it started vibrating before I'd taken 3 steps, not buzzing once or twice, vibrating continuously in long, rolling waves, the way phones do when notifications stack faster than the hardware can parse them. I stopped walking. A family of 4 parted around me like water around a stone. I looked at the screen, and for a moment I just stood there in the middle of the concourse, reading the numbers. The video had 4.2 million views. I read that 4 times to make sure I was reading it correctly, and then I put the phone in my jacket pocket and walked to a row of seats near the baggage claim, and sat down by myself for a moment. My kit bag was still on the carousel. I watched it go around once. I thought about the camera on the ceiling above gate D-17, the small black dome that had been doing its job with complete indifference while everything else in that terminal was going sideways. I thought about Officer Kowalski's finger pointing at me, not quite steady. I thought about the sound of those phone shutters clicking. One after another, the witnesses assembling themselves without being asked. Then I picked up my bag and called Dana. She answered immediately. "How bad is it?" I said before she could speak. "It's not bad," she said. "It's significant. There's a difference." A pause, and I could hear papers moving in the background. "The video is clean, Marcus. Every frame of it. You never raised your voice, never moved toward him, never did anything other than stand there. He shoved a man in dress blues who was holding a coffee cup, in front of a crowd, on camera. There's nothing ambiguous about what happened. What are people saying? Veterans groups are organizing. There are at least 4 major military advocacy accounts who've shared the clip with combined followings in the millions. CNN put it on their homepage 2 hours ago. She stopped, and I heard her take a deliberate breath. The senator's office called me back already. His chief of staff wants to speak with you directly. This week. Something in my chest shifted. Not excitement exactly, but the recognition of a kind of gravity. The sense of a situation that had moved beyond the personal and into something larger and more consequential. I pressed my thumb and forefinger into the bridge of my nose and breathed. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. "Tonight? Nothing. Go home. Eat something. Sleep. Tomorrow morning, don't answer any media calls, don't post anything, don't comment on anything. I've already been in contact with a civil rights attorney in Detroit, a man named Frederick Okafor. Very good. He's handled 3 federal excessive force cases in the last 5 years. He wants to speak with you at 9 tomorrow morning." She paused again. "And Marcus, the woman, the one with the child. Her name is Marie Claire Joseph. A journalist at the Detroit Free Press found her this afternoon. She's willing to speak on the record." I stared at the baggage carousel for a moment. The belt was empty now, turning in a slow, purposeless circle. "Good," I said quietly. "That's good." That night I ate reheated rice and beans from the back of my refrigerator and sat at my kitchen table in the dark for a long time, not thinking in any organized way, but simply sitting with the accumulated weight of the day. The dress blues were hanging on the back of the bedroom door again, the same way they had been hanging in Detroit 24 hours earlier, ribbons catching the light from the street lamp outside. I looked at them for a while. I thought about a specific morning in Helmand in the fall of 2019, when a vehicle 2 positions ahead of mine hit an IED and I had to make 3 decisions in under 4 seconds, and how afterward the lieutenant colonel had come to find me and asked me very quietly how I was holding up. I had told him the truth, which was that I was fine and that I intended to stay fine, and he had looked at me for a long moment and said, "Good, because the work isn't done yet." I had never forgotten that. I don't think I was supposed to. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling, running through the facts the way I ran through pre-mission briefings, methodically, in order, without emotion. Kowalski had shoved me. There were witnesses. There was camera footage, both official airport security and private phone video. I had done nothing, not one thing, that could be characterized as provocative, threatening, or outside the boundaries of civil behavior. The law was not complicated. The facts were not complicated. What was complicated, as it always is, was whether the people with the power to act on those facts were going to do so. That was the variable I could not control directly. What I could control was the quality of the pressure applied from every other direction. I got up at 3 in the morning and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table again, this time with a legal pad and a pen. I wrote down everything I remembered about the incident in the order it happened. Exact times, exact words, exact sequence of physical events. I wrote down the names of everyone I had seen who might have witnessed it. I wrote down the badge number and name from Kowalski's plate, which I had photographed on my phone in the 2 seconds between his final comment and my decision to walk away. Then I read back through what I had written, underlined the parts that mattered most, and set the pen down and drank my coffee. Outside the kitchen window, Jacksonville was still dark and quiet, the kind of pre-dawn quiet that feels provisional, like the world is holding its breath before deciding what kind of day it's going to be. I called Frederick Okafor at 9 the next morning, on the dot. He was already in his office. He spoke for 45 minutes with the steady, precise efficiency of a man who had processed situations like this many times before and understood that every word was building material for what came later. He told me that what had been recorded was, in his professional opinion, a clear case of excessive force and civil rights violation under federal statute. He told me that the existence of multiple independent video sources made suppression of evidence functionally impossible. And then he told me something I had not yet known, something that Dana had discovered in the hours since our call the previous evening. Something that put a hand on my shoulder and turned me to face an entirely different direction. Officer Robert Kowalski had 3 prior use of force complaints in his personnel file. All 3 had been reviewed internally. All 3 had been closed without disciplinary action. 2 of the 3 complainants were black men. One was a black woman, a nurse, who had been stopped in the short-term parking structure for what Kowalski reported as suspicious behavior, and what she reported, in a formal complaint backed by a partial parking garage recording, as standing next to her own car while waiting for her daughter. That complaint had been reviewed by a Lieutenant Daniel Maris of the Detroit Airport Police, who had determined it lacked sufficient grounds for further action and filed it accordingly. Maris was Kowalski's direct supervisor. He was also, Okafor told me, with the particular quietness of someone laying down a card of significant weight, the officer who had certified Kowalski's last annual performance review. A review in which Kowalski had received a rating of exceeds expectations in the category of community relations. The coffee in my hand went cold. I set it on the desk and pressed my back against the chair. My voice, when it came, was completely even. "How do you want to proceed?" I asked. "We file," Okafor said simply. "Federal Court, Eastern District of Michigan. Excessive force, racial discrimination in the exercise of police authority, and institutional failure to act on documented prior complaints. We name Kowalski as primary defendant. We name Maris. And we name the Detroit Airport Police Authority as an institutional defendant for their pattern of inadequate response." He paused. "We also make ourselves available to the Senate Judiciary Committee, which has already reached out to my office this morning, separately from their contact with you." I was quiet for a moment. Through the window behind Okafor, I was on a video call, and I could see the gray Detroit skyline 900 miles away. The sky was flat and white, the kind of sky that doesn't take sides. "Let's do it," I said. The filing happened 4 days later. It hit the news wires within the hour. By evening, the story had evolved from a viral video into a federal civil rights case with named defendants, documented prior complaints, and a sitting senator who had issued a statement calling for a full congressional review of use of force policies at federally regulated transportation facilities. Kowalski's name, which the department had declined to confirm to journalists for the first 3 days, was now a matter of public federal record. So was Maris's. So was the institutional complaint history that their own internal review process had worked very hard to keep inside the building. The first time I heard Kowalski speak publicly was on a local Detroit news segment 5 days after the incident. The department had arranged it, a brief, controlled appearance in full uniform, flanked by a union representative and a spokesperson who looked like she was having the worst week of her professional life. Kowalski said he had been responding to what he perceived as an escalating situation and had acted within department guidelines. He said the video did not represent the full context of the encounter. He said he had deep respect for the military. He said all of this in the flat, rehearsed tone of a man reading from a card written by someone who knew that everything he said was going to be entered into a federal filing within 24 hours. I watched it once. I did not feel angry. I felt something much quieter than anger. The specific, focused energy of a person watching an opponent play the last of a very weak hand, who already knows exactly how the next several moves will go. The Senate hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, the Detroit Airport Police Authority announced it was placing Kowalski on administrative leave pending internal review, a decision they framed as proactive and responsible, and which Okafor described to me, without particular drama, as what happens when an institution realizes it is about to be examined by people with subpoena power. Maris was not placed on administrative leave. He was, however, reassigned from supervisory duties, effective immediately, for reasons the department declined to specify. A decision that lasted exactly 9 days before a Detroit Free Press journalist obtained the internal memo authorizing the reassignment, which cited questions regarding the completeness and accuracy of prior use of force complaint documentation. The journalist published the memo in full. Maris gave no public comment. The night before the Senate hearing, I stayed at a hotel 2 blocks from the Capitol. Dana was in the room next to mine. Okafor was down the hall. I ordered room service and ate alone, and then I took out my dress blues and hung them on the back of the bathroom door and pressed them myself, the same way I always did, taking my time with each crease, making sure every ribbon was in exact order. I had worn this uniform in places that would turn your hair white. I'd worn it standing over the grave of a man I had served alongside for 3 years who did not come home. I had worn it through the Detroit airport on August 14th, holding a cup of coffee, doing nothing wrong. I ironed every crease twice. Then I sat in the hotel room in the quiet and stayed there for a long time. I thought about Mary Claire Joseph, who had given a full interview to the Washington Post and whose story, a Haitian immigrant, legal resident of 12 years, home health aide, mother of 2, standing in that airport with her toddler trying to ask a question about her gait and being treated like a threat, had added a dimension to the whole situation that no amount of departmental spin could absorb. I thought about the 3 complainants in Kowalski's file, the 2 men and the nurse, who had filed formally and been told it wasn't enough. I thought about all the people who hadn't filed at all. I was ready. The hearing room was wood-paneled and high-ceilinged and full of cameras. I sat at the witness table in my dress blues, Okafor to my left, Dana in the gallery behind me. The panel of senators was 8 people, and the chair opened by reading aloud, slowly, deliberately, the full sequence of events from the incident report, from Kowalski's prior complaint history, from the internal memos, from the annual performance review that had rated his community relations as exceeds expectations. The room was very quiet while she read. When she finished, she set the papers down and looked at me directly. "Staff Sergeant Webb," she said, "I want to ask you in your own words what you believe this incident represents." I looked at her steadily. Then I looked briefly out at the room, the cameras, the gallery, the faces, the room doing what rooms like this are supposed to do when they're working correctly. "Ma'am," I said, and my voice was quiet and completely level. "It represents the difference between what we tell people this country stands for and what some of its institutions are willing to actually defend." The silence that followed filled the room the way water fills a vessel, completely, without gaps. Somewhere in the gallery, I heard someone exhale. Kowalski's administrative leave became a termination 14 days after the hearing. The department's press release was 4 sentences long and specified, with the delicate precision of a document reviewed by many lawyers, that the separation was voluntary and agreed upon. Okafor, reading it over the phone, made a sound I had never heard from him before. Brief, dry, the sound of a man who had seen this particular performance too many times to find it anything but wearily predictable. Maris resigned the following week, before the department could finish its internal review. He submitted his resignation by email on a Tuesday morning, effective immediately, forfeiting his pension eligibility for the current period. The Free Press got a copy of that document too. Some people in that city have sources everywhere, and not all of them are fond of institutional cover stories. The federal case was settled 8 months later. The terms were sealed, but the department issued a public statement confirming the creation of a formal independent civilian review board for use of force complaints, mandatory body camera activation protocols for all airport police officers, and a complete external audit of all prior complaint records going back 7 years. Marie Claire Joseph was separately acknowledged in a departmental statement, not apologized to, because institutions rarely use that word, but acknowledged, which in this context was a beginning. I was at a barbecue at my mother's house in Detroit when I heard about the settlement. It was a Saturday in April, 8 months almost to the day from August 14th, and my mother had made jerk chicken and rice and peas and her macaroni that people have driven unreasonable distances to eat. My brother was there, and Dana, and cousins I hadn't seen since Christmas. Dana found me at the back of the yard near the grill and showed me the notification on her phone, the brief wire service dispatch, and I read it twice and handed the phone back. She was watching me carefully. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it honestly, the way she would have expected me to. I looked around the yard, the folding tables, the paper plates, the sound of my mother laughing at something someone had said inside, the late afternoon light coming through the oak tree my grandfather had planted 50 years ago in the corner of the yard. I looked down at my hand, which was holding a plain white paper cup of sweet tea, and I thought about a different cup hitting a different floor 9 months earlier, and the sound it made, and everything that had followed from that sound. "I feel like it's a start," I said, And I feel like I'm hungry. Dana smiled. The real one, the one she keeps for moments she means. She shook her head slightly and went back inside. I stood at the grill for another moment alone, turning the chicken, listening to the yard fill around me with everything that was still good. The dress blues were folded in their garment bag in the trunk of my rental car, the way they always traveled. I would press them again before the next time I wore them, the same way I always did. Some habits are not habits at all. They're just the shape of who you are. The oak tree moved once in the wind, slow and certain. I turned the chicken again and let it be enough.